pens because I chew on them and everything.
The clock could be a minute. No, it's right on.
59, I got 59.
Ooh, somebody corrected it,
I
yeah.
did, right after our last meeting, and then I said, we'll have to watch if the batteries are getting low because it loses time.
losing.
Right.
Point now.
This is my only communication,
For the city,
'cause I didn't send this out to
I
you
can't
guys.
actually get it on the computer. I can't get in. It's because I'm an idiot.
You guys, your life will be easier.
He's not here, unfortunately. Rick is my.
I'm not sure that's the kind of easy I had in mind.
Yeah, I have. American Experiment. I got all three. Personal, work, and city. Yeah, and I got them all in here, so you can just look at Steve.
Good catch for those minutes.
Well, yeah, your kids aren't that old yet, but they could probably do it, you know.
No, they're saying,
Oh, you need it. You need it. Oh, well, let me see. Let me see. Yep. Hold on, I bet I got it. Let's see.
This is somebody's morning.
You're correct. Let's see. Mail. Counts. City.
Oh, we have extras, don't we, for everyone?
Yeah, there's server and domain. Those are the two things you need.
Is it right underneath? No, that's just.
Can't tell you how many times I've showed up at a meeting and forgot that my stuff on the printer.
Well, it's on the internet.
Okay, I will call the meeting to order. We'll call the roll.
Council members Walsh. Hughes. Jones. Edberg. Engstrand.
Here.
Got a full complement here. Will everyone join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to item 2A, approval of the minutes of the regular city council meeting. I had a couple notes. It sounds like we have a correction to page 4, the proper representatives for Ramsey County League of Local Government and Ramsey County Dispatch and Policy Committee and Northeast Youth and Family Services were the couple biggies. And then I noted one other one in attendance. It says that Ms. Kane was here, but I believe she was not, and Sam Crosby was. So those are the notes that I have. Does anyone have any other corrections to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Corrected minutes.
Do I have a motion and a second? All those in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to 2B, minutes of the City Council work session for January 18, 2022. Does anybody have any corrections? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? And one abstention. All right, moving on to the adoption of the agenda. Unless anyone has any additions or deletions to that, I'd entertain a motion.
Mayor, I have some questions on the consent. I'm just kidding.
When's it going to end, Bill? All right.
Discipline should be imposed, Mr. Mayor.
I'm noting it in the back of my mind, keeping a score over here, Bill. That's 2 for Bill. Okay. Counting 2 weeks ago's meeting. All right. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
A motion, a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have an agenda. Moving on to item 4, consent agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Item 5, visitors and presentations. We have nothing scheduled. Item 6, public hearings. We have nothing scheduled. And item 7, unfinished business. Nothing scheduled. So we can jump right into 8, new business A. 8A, ordinance first reading, amending the city charter. And I understand we have a report from our own Mark Sather that's going to say a few words about it. Come on up.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm Mark Sather, and I'm here this evening in the capacity as Secretary of the Charter Commission. And both our president and vice president, or chair and vice chair, are not able to attend this evening, or they'd be here in my stead. But we're here to report on a couple things. One is response to a request that we had from the City Council that initiated quite a bit of discussion with the Charter Commission. And also just a little bit of an update on a second role that the Charter Commission plays, and that's it serves as the city's redistricting committee, and it has specific statutory responsibilities as well as charter responsibilities. But first, a little bit of background for Mayor and the council. Mayor has been a member of our Charter Commission, but it is unique in terms of the different commissions that serve the city in that it is not appointed by the mayor, and it does not serve in an advisory capacity. But in fact, its members are appointed by the chief judge at district court for specific terms, and there's other standards that have to be met in terms of attendance, et cetera, that are set forth both in our charter as well as the commission's bylaws. The first Charter Commission actually began meeting, I believe, in about 1920, and that resulted in the adoption of our first version of the Home Rule Charter, and it's been amended several times since then. But of the 857 cities in the state, there's probably about 160, that's a little bit on the low side, I'm just estimating, of those cities function with a Home Rule Charter. And all the others are considered statutory cities, and their responsibilities and their authorities are set by state statutes. Those cities that became home rule charters, I'm just going to make sure this doesn't go off, are community or cities that decided to play a much stronger role in their own governance. So as a home rule city, basically the residents of our community adopted a charter, and it's often referred to as sort of a lightweight constitution, but it sets forth the form of government, the responsibility of the mayor, the city council, terms of office and so forth, and as well as two different positions, actually three, the city attorney, the city manager, and the city clerk are defined in the charter. And it is in that capacity that the Charter Commission was requested by the City Council last year to take a look at a provision that set forth the time in which the City Council appoints its chair, or vice chair, excuse me. And it was recommended that rather than the current provision that calls for electing the council's chairman, I shouldn't say, I was thinking vice mayor, but council chair, at the first meeting in January following the municipal election, be reconsidered and actually have that set for a year thereafter, so that the proposal that was brought to the Charter Commission suggested that the council may be better prepared to perform that function if there had been, for example, a larger turnover in the council during that time, so that they'd become more familiar. The Charter Commission not only discussed that request, but did some research in terms of other home rule cities of comparable size, and found that there is no clear trend. There's that position is called a vice mayor in some places, an assistant mayor in others, and then there's a few that call for a council chair. And yet when and how they're appointed, sometimes the charter is pretty much silent. It just says the city council shall appoint a person in that capacity, and it doesn't even set a term. And so we thought there's not a lot of guidance in that direction. And then it was at that point that the commission started to develop a consensus that kind of goes along with that old adage that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they just said this has been going on for quite a while. We imagined a few different scenarios, and that would be that if there had been a council that was considered not responsive, not responsive to the general public, and they, at a time when there's maybe 2 new council members elected, and they want to have a greater influence on it, there would be an opportunity then for that to begin rather than wait a whole year. Others felt that, that the old theory behind bureaucracy is that things shouldn't happen that fast. Maybe if people are upset, they're out of time to take a deep breath. But after all of that discussion, it was the decision to recommend no change in that. Other than during that, we found, during that debate and review of our charter, we found, again, a few pesky errors. And that, for instance, it wasn't that long ago, the city council used to have elections every year. And council members and the mayor were elected for 3-year terms. So 1 year there would be 2 council members up. Next year, 2 council members, and the following year, the mayor and the remaining council member. And so we were having elections annually, and at that point, they were actually even held in March. And the argument that a lot of that was left over, I think, from the old township days when township elections were still done during that time. And there was a strong argument that was made by some council members that that was a better time because it allowed the election of the city council to be held at a time when there was more focus on that, and it didn't get lost way down the ballot. So during a time when perhaps there's a presidential election, statewide election, and so forth, that the council gets way down there. So when local issues are discussed, they're not taken as important. There were others that argued that that was sort of the ultimate incumbent advantage because it was extremely difficult to go out and in Minnesota, think about going out and door knocking on a night like this, or even some council members said it's really even hard to pound in re-rod to put your campaign signs out in frozen ground. So that went around for a while, and then suddenly there was a shift on the council, and they said, let's do a change. They sent it to the Charter Commission. Charter Commission thought it was a good idea, brought it forward in that change. However, it took a long time to go from, we had to extend. The law does not provide for shortening someone who was elected their term, so we had to extend some of the terms to kind of get into that 2-year cycle, and that was done. And yet, in doing that, everybody thought they had the I's dotted and T's crossed, but we overlooked some references to the annual election. So, then there was some attempts to correct those, and then others just said, well, we're not going to bother reprinting a new charter just to correct some of those things. So when we were at this, we said, let's get them done. And there was also a big attempt at one time to remove any gender-specific terms out of the charter. So we got rid of a lot of he's. A council member, he shall. The mayor, he shall. The city manager, he shall, and so forth. Those were all pretty much out, but a couple of our members identified another term in there that was called foreman, and it comes under the definition or the responsibilities for appointing the official newspaper. And we weren't really sure what that meant, that term, because it says the publisher or the foreman. We checked with the local newspaper, and they said they hadn't really heard of it, and they did a research and said, nobody really can remember that. It must be really old. So our recommendation, I'll get into that really quick here, but that removes that. Plus, we found some specific references to state statutes, which makes a lot of sense. So we adopt, even though we wanted to be independent as a city with a home rule charter, that made sense, and in some cases, you really have the responsibility to follow state statutes also. You can't be totally independent. And so election election laws is one example. So in some cases, we said the election shall be conducted according to this. In some cases, when we do things, it's called adoption by reference, that it was specific to a chapter, section, and subsection. And a lot of times the legislature will renumber things to make sense and might delete some of those sections. So we said if that happens, we could have confusion in the future. So unless it's pertinent, let's get rid of that. So we have some of those in there. You have a draft, a resolution from the Charter Commission, as well as a draft ordinance that follows that identically, and it shows highlighted what those changes are. But I'd be happy to go through all those, but I think they're pretty self-explanatory. So the changes fall into those three categories. And they're just kind of technical corrections. There's nothing there that really changes the city charter from a pertinent standpoint. So just another really quick background on it is the charter can be amended in 4 ways, and 3 of them actually differ only in how they're initiated, but they all require a referendum. And usually that is done, the council can set that date, but more often than not, that's done in conjunction with a local election. And so you see that in cities. Minneapolis has been in the news quite a bit for that, and that's how it would happen here. Now, one method is that the amendment is initiated by the city council. And they would then refer it to the Charter Commission. But regardless of the Charter Commission, it's kind of a meet and confer, but they don't have to have their consent. And that goes on to to a referendum of the people. The next one would be that the Charter Commission itself can initiate a change. And if the council goes along with that, there's a shortcut. And if not, then the Charter Commission can bring an initiative to the council, and the council is bound to put that on the referendum. And there's a third one where with a sufficient number of signatures on a petition, the public can initiate a change. And again, there's certain things that the council must do to do that. They have to agree to the wording of the question on the ballot, and that's actually provided for in the charter, but then scheduling the election and so forth. And then finally, just to streamline things, several years ago there was a 4th method, and that is what we've used for the last several amendments into the charter, and that's what we're recommending tonight. And that's where it's done by ordinance. And the procedure then that would be followed, I think, is pretty well covered in your city manager's memorandum. But it starts like this, where the City Charter Commission presents a proposal to the council. The council then would adopt it or not adopt it by ordinance. And if it's adopted by ordinance, then there's not a real lengthy, but there's a remonstrance period where the public can bring a petition in opposition to that change, and then it switches over to putting it on the ballot. But the council has to first hold a public hearing and has the opportunity to change it or somehow deal with the questions that come up. And then after, I believe, the 60-day waiting period, then it would take effect. And but it has to be unanimous. So what we're recommending tonight is that you take a close look at this, because one council member, in a sense, has veto authority over that. But then if it goes back, it's then considered rejected by the city council. It then goes back to the Charter Commission. And then the Charter Commission can switch over to one of those other methods and put it on the ballot and kind of go around the council's wishes on that. But these, especially this one, is a really good example of how that can be done and how it streamlines it. And, you know, it's not going to have a lot of interest anyway. So that's what we're recommending. I'd be happy to go through or respond to any questions you have. We will have somebody here, most likely just to be here if there's questions at the second reading. And but that's what I have on that. And then, Mr. Mayor, if I'd respond to any questions now. If not, I'd like to update you on our role as the redistricting committee.
Thank you, Mr. Sather. Does the council have any questions specific to the proposed amendment to the charter? Councilman Jones.
I do. I'm being technical because this is being technical, Mr. Sather, and thank you for your time and service. Just you referred to, it caught my eye, you're adding general election in section 4.04, municipal general election, but at the header on the top of section 2.02, it just says municipal elections. And then further in section 404, it just says the general election without municipal. And then at section 4.13, it also, it does, it's general is being added back in there, municipal general election. So it's just, I'm being technical, but if you're going to make the changes, they seem like they should all be the same. And the question would be, is there a reason at the last sentence of section 404, mayor vacancy of office, that municipal isn't included in the general election, or it's just one of those things that is missed?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Jones, we focused on the text rather than some of the titles perhaps, so that's a good catch. But generally, the main change was we had, the elections were, we wanted to purge any references to an annual election.
Understood.
And then we found different definitions of the election, so municipal election and so forth. General election is a term that's used under, you'll see actually on the section 202, where it refers to chapter 205. Now, we used to be more specific because we had 205.07, and that actually has changed since that was originally in there. So by putting it in chapter 205, that is still that section of the statute that deals with municipal or local elections. But they are called general elections, and the distinction there is there could be a primary election.
Right.
There could be a special election set up by the council. And so when we're saying following the municipal election, well, what does that mean? It could have been any of the three above. So we put the general election, which is defined in the statutes.
So it just seems the term municipal almost seems redundant to me. And I don't, but if it goes back through the whole thing and we got to go through this, it's technical, I know.
No. I mean, you have a general election in 2022, but not a municipal election in 22, and we have a meeting in January 23.
Right? Does the city charter
that
recognize
follows.
anybody else's? I don't care. I really don't. It just seems odd that it's not in one place and it is in another. That's all.
It sounds like our city attorney can shed some light on that. Please do.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Just quickly, just a brief comment. I think, yes, good catch, and I would recommend using municipal general election consistently throughout, because as the speaker indicated in Chapter 205, that is how it's referred to.
Right. So that's it. Thank you. Sorry to make it longer.
Any other questions for Mr. Sather on this? Councilman Edward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Sather, I know that you have now taken one of your charges off the table in terms of consideration of other changes. Is there any other agenda items that remain active in the Charter Commission in terms of other forthcoming future amendments to the charter? I don't need a description, or I'm just curious. If so, get a short version.
During the discussion on how specific the references to statutory sections for those where we have recommended changes, we discussed the fact that, again, on the basis that the charter, the home rule charter should reflect the values of the community to determine its own priorities, procedures, and so forth. There were sections, examples that we were using where the legislature could make a change that in fact impacts something more significant than the definition of an election. And one was financing. So we did look at chapter, I'd have to go back, there's a section that talks about certificates of indebtedness, and it does specifically point to a statutory section down to, subdivision whatever. And somebody says, we change that. And then as we looked at it, we thought, well, no, because that's pretty specific right now. And if they change that, but there's some thought that when the charter was first adopted, for instance, for issuing bonds, that there's about 7 different authorities under which the council can issue bonds. So when you're issuing utility bonds, you're actually pledging the revenues of the water utility or the sewer. Special assessment bonds are, that's if there's a project where you're assessing at least 20%, then you don't have to, deal with anything separately. But on building bonds, so the council either has or is in the process of issuing bonds right now, and it's under a section of the statutes that didn't exist at the time the charter was adopted, and didn't exist up until that long ago. I'd have to go back and look. But for instance, when this building was built, the city council issued general obligation municipal building bonds, and it had to have a referendum for it, much like the school district had to have a referendum to issue all the building bonds. So there was some discussion, should we take a look at that? Have there been changes in our adoption by reference that really have, the term inadvertent isn't correct, but did we acknowledge that as a community? Is that a good idea or not? Because at one time, to issue those bonds, you had to have a referendum. And then, as I say, there's so many different things. When we issued first built the sports center, the city used, there were like 2 cities in the metropolitan area other than Minneapolis and St. Paul that could issue bonds as port authorities, and we were one of them. So we issued port authority bonds, and I don't have enough time tonight to explain how all that is and where's the port kind of thing, as people said. But there was a lot of issues at that point, and the council felt that there was a way of, in a sense, getting the public's involvement in that, but also being able to expedite the purchase of that building, because it was here's an opportunity to get it at a good price and so forth. They went ahead, and but there they were pledging revenues from other municipalities as well as revenue from the sports center itself, where if you build a city hall, you really aren't doing that, for instance. So that was discussed at our last meeting only when we were looking at that one section pertaining to certificates of indebtedness. And there is no initiative at this point, but going back to your question, that's the only other thing that's been discussed in terms of amendments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sather. Why don't we move on to a brief report on redistricting?
Yeah, I'll try to move this quicker. But Chapter 3 of the Charter establishes specific responsibility for redistricting, or in other words, modifying ward boundaries. It assigns that to the Charter Commission. And feel free to read that. It's pretty self-explanatory, but basically we have 5 wards. And if you take the revised population estimate of just short of 25,000, it comes to 4,981 persons per ward would divide it equally among the 5 wards, which is what the charter calls for, as well as state statutes. And if we go back and take a look at the current population of the ward boundaries as they are, it varies from let's see if I can look at this real quick. One extreme is it has 122 persons more than the average, and one has 115 less, but plus or minus less than 2.5% per ward. So the question then came up to the commission. It's defined both in the city charter, which says as equally as possible, as nearly as possible. And the state statute says as close as practicable. And we've asked for the services of the city attorney to help us define that, because we haven't been able to find it defined in the statutes yet. And we've worked with the Secretary of States and the League of Cities, and nobody's really quite aware of that. So we've had opinions from some people outside of our Charter Commission and outside of the city that said, I think you have some discretion on that. And from a practical standpoint, we talked about these population estimates were done effective April 1st, almost 2 years ago. And since then, the council has approved, and we've had new housing developments with as many as 100 and some units constructed, which could, like in Ward 5, 2 major apartment buildings have been added that may not, well, one probably wasn't counted at all, and one was maybe only partially. The Waters was probably only partially counted at that time as it was filling up. So it's a snapshot in time that as of April, this is it. But these figures are already probably off a little bit. So we said, how much time do you spend moving boundaries around and perhaps adding to the workload of a variety of people? Because there's procedures in there where you have to notify people if they've been moved to different wards. You have to go around and work with them, perhaps even finding a different polling place. And so there's a certain advantage of, if you can keep it, the minimum change in it might be the best. And so the Charter Commission really hasn't gotten in real deep in that kind of policy decision yet, other than we're just gathering information. Now, the problem is the city cannot, and the Charter Commission on behalf of the city cannot really get going on its work seriously until the congressional and the state legislative districts are set. And they're both before a 5-judge panel right now because the legislature couldn't agree on it. And that's the way it's been for the last several decades. And so now they have to have their work done by February 15th. And then that would be brought out so we could look and see how that impacts the city. An example is before this last decade, the city was basically in one senatorial district. And so we had only one Senate seat that we had, and then it was divided among 2 legislative seats. Then they basically cut the city in half, so everything, give or take a few blocks in certain areas. South of Cedar is in one Senate district, north of Cedar is in another. And there's 5 proposals that are currently under consideration by this panel of judges. And so we're waiting to see. Now, here's the problem. Once that's done, we would normally have 60 days from that time, which is pretty comfortable. Except so if it's done by December, by February 15th, we'd have it until like April 15th to get it done. And but there's another provision that says it has to be done 19 weeks before the state general election, or the state primary election. And I'm not sure, I'd have to go back and see if that was written before they changed the primary election dates or what. But so now that means we've got to have it done by March 29th. So we're really looking at 45 days. And even if the Charter Commission had done most of its work, but then depending on where the lines are drawn has to modify it, we could probably come to you with a tentative plan relatively quick. Actually, we come to the city clerk with that plan, and then there's some procedures how that goes through. But then the council, once we agree on a plan, there has to be a public hearing held by the Charter Commission or the Redistricting Commission, and to which the mayor and the council are invited. And so you can see how this is much different than your other boards and commissions. And there's even some stuff that's almost humorous in terms of the responsibility that it puts on the charter or the city council to act once the commission has come up with its recommendations, and failure to do it under the charter says it takes effect even without the council. Under the statute, it says that the mayor and the council shall not be paid until it's done. So we'd argue that the charter prevails there, but let's just get it done. So the problem is then it also says that it's done by ordinance, and typically it takes 30 days to get an ordinance through the city if it follows its normal procedure, sometimes even longer. There's a provision for an emergency ordinance, and yet I'm not sure that this was the intent of that provision for emergency ordinances, but maybe that could be made. So stay tuned. We're going to be working. And we're going to try to step up our schedule so that as soon as we get in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, when that state report comes out, if that's timely, then we can get going pretty quick. But it might take another opinion from the city attorney, for instance, and a determination from the council is, would it be an appropriate use of the emergency ordinance provision, or another way, and we haven't really studied this completely, but could approval of the plan even before the charter is done, or the ordinance is affected, would that be enough? Because there's another provision in it that says that the ordinance takes effect almost the day before the next primary election, which puts it in a whole other thing. So it's complicated. And but that's what we're up to. And again, we'd like to, as much as possible, think about the voters and the access to good, accessible buildings, and making it clear. So if people are used to, I live in the 3rd Ward, been here for 35 years or something. We've always voted at Sunrise Junior High. And if somebody said, well, you get out and now go over to Lake Ayres or something because you're on the wrong side of McKnight, I'll figure it out. But there's other people who might find that more difficult. And so in some cities, I'm sure it's important because there might be different populations that feel they're being disenfranchised by what we often refer to as gerrymandering. But here it's just how close is close enough. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Sather. I appreciate the report on redistricting, and I want to thank you and the rest of the members of the city charter for your good work, and we look forward to seeing how things shape out.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, that being the first reading, I believe we don't require anything else. We can move on to item 8B, resolution accepting feasibility report and ordering public hearing for the 2022 South Shore Boulevard Sanitary Sewer Extension Project. Mr. Copy.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So tonight we have before you a unique opportunity to extend sanitary sewer to an area that currently does not have. If you look at the graphic up on the screen, the large red arrow points to one of the areas that was identified in the city's last comprehensive plan. Currently, we have about 20 parcels within the city of White Bear Lake that do not have municipal sanitary sewer. This being the largest remaining with 13 lots. Again, kind of taking out half of what we have left of private septic systems. We already have 2 or 3 that are failing in that area. That we've allowed to remain on, knowing this project is coming along so that we can get those homes hooked up to that sanitary sewer. So this is the specific area. Uniquely enough, we are doing this in a joint project with Ramsey County and White Bear Township as part of the Lake Links Trail along South Shore Boulevard from White Bear Avenue to East County line. So those are the 13 parcels that are currently not on municipal sanitary sewer in that area. Going on, so we need to extend about 750 feet of sanitary sewer main. We would extend services to each of those 13 parcels with an approximate cost of little over $166,000. So tonight, what we would present before the council is a feasibility study that was done that shows that this project is cost-effective, necessary, and feasible to extend sanitary sewer to these parcels. We're having an independent appraiser look at the parcels and the benefit that it provides to justify the final assessments to those properties. So we will look at how those actual assessments are spread out once we get that report back, and look at what we can justifiably assess those parcels. So tonight, we would ask that council accept the feasibility study and order a public hearing, which is the next step in the Chapter 429 process, where it allows the affected parcels to voice their opinion on the project and any concerns they might have. So with that in front of you, we would recommend adoption of the attached resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Copy. Council, any questions? If not,
I do, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Mr.
I'm
Mayor.
sorry, I didn't see you.
No, I was very high on it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Colby, is it my understanding that water is also not provided to these residents? That they would get theirs from township?
So the water is, good question. We've covered this under previous discussion on this topic. Water has traditionally to these homes been provided by the township. What we propose under this project is we are actually going to install just a short little interconnect and take that segment over, and those residents would now be provided water from the city of White Bear Lake.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Move approval.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The resolution is passed. Moving on to B, item 8C, resolution authorizing a contract with LISC CDI for the County Road E Corridor Revitalization Study. Ms. Kane, is this you, or who's taking this?
It is indeed.
I'll vamp a little bit so you can get your slides pulled up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The County Road E Corridor has long been on the priority list of the city council and city staff over the years, as it's gone through a variety of ebbs and flows, and it's a unique corridor in the city of White Bear Lake that it's highlighted mostly by residential with small commercial nodes at White Bear Avenue, the fire station at McKnight and Bel Air, as I think most of the community is aware of the dated designs of those former gas station facilities that no longer meet current market demand. And so I went back through some of our planning efforts. I saw lots of outreach efforts, and meetings were held with stakeholders back in 2016. At that same time, the city was provided the opportunity to acquire the northeast corner of E and Bel Air, which was put the city at a spot at the table for the future redevelopment of those four corners. And let's see, as well as extended the downtown, or the revolving loan and grant program that had been established for approximately 25 years in the downtown area. A new program was established in 2017 to focus public financing options to encourage a private investment within the County Road E corridor. Councilmember Edberg did ask in advance of tonight's meeting to understand this scope of the revolving loan and grant program that has been established for County Road E. There have been 3 projects to date that have leveraged this program. I believe it was a marketing facility, a conversion of the former Sunrise Insurance building that's on the top photograph here into general office, as well as the middle photo here that some of you may not recognize as the former Pfeffer property, which will soon be Bean & Co., coffee shop, ice cream, and creperie. I think we've accomplished at least 2 of the most frequently cited desires of the neighbors in that neighborhood, and the crepes are just icing on the cake. In addition, Councilmember Edberg also wanted to know and noted that in the application that was completed for the grant program that I'll be getting to for this request, we had projected, staff analyzed or projected that the value of the Barnum was approximately $30 million. Previously, it was $4 5 residential lots with 4 homes on it. Had a market value of $850,000 before the 192-unit apartment building was constructed by Schaefer Richardson, and happy to report to the council tonight that it's actually increased in market value to $41 million. That was without any public assistance. Those are market rate apartments. I think you've all read in the local media about the housing crisis, how strong the market rate rental product is, and I think this kind of demonstrates that strongly for the council. So based on that history and the knowledge of wanting to spur greater private investment in the corridor, Ramsey County actually created a pilot program back in 2019 with the establishment of a broader community development department there at the county. And it was the goal of the program was to revive important corridors that were located throughout Ramsey County. Eligible uses would include planning efforts, land use analysis, small area or area-wide initiatives, feasibility studies, and infrastructure planning and conceptual designs, potentially for some opportunity sites. To be eligible, corridors either had to be multi-jurisdictional, and as you can see in this map, there are 3 primary municipalities that County Road E really serves as a vital corridor through: Vadnais Heights, Gem Lake, and the city of White Bear Lake. It had to include low-income census tracts. At the time it did, but following some American Community Survey in 2019, we no longer have, in the city of White Bear Lake, low-income census tracts along this corridor. And again, the corridor needed to have be located along existing or planned transit routes. And so you'll see in the narrative that there was a lot of reference to Rush Line and the desire to strengthen that east-west service along the County Road E corridor. In light of this pilot program, city staff reached out to staff at Vadnais Heights and to explore a joint application back in 2019. It seems like eons ago. And in January of 2020, pre-pandemic, the city was awarded a 50% match of $25,000, and with White Bear Lake and Vadnais Heights splitting the remaining $25,000 at a $16,000 rate for White Bear Lake and $9,000 for Vadnais Heights. And that really reflects kind of the land area in the study area allocated or represented by each municipality. There is one other municipality, as the council is well aware, Gem Lake. We met with their mayor, their previous mayor, who's no longer in office, and he indicated support for the project, but wasn't sure about the financial contribution due to the fact that Gem Lake had recently done a pretty comprehensive land use analysis of their 3 corners that surround Highway 61 and County Road E intersection. And I do have a map of that at the end, but I can also touch on there is a provision or an add-on in the contract should Gem Lake want to take on a little bit more detailed analysis of their opportunity sites, that they could pay a separate fee above and beyond, so that their contribution would be $6,000 if they wanted to focus on something that is beyond the scope of the actual proposal that is being presented this evening. So in light of being awarded matching grant funds, we did secure a proposal from Local Initiative Corporation of Twin Cities, who has deep, extensive experience in leading communities through similar efforts focused on their corridor development initiative. In fact, they did one for the city of Fridley years ago, and I was able to sit on the technical committee and talk about how White Bear Lake was able to achieve the nice corridor improvements along Highway 61. So it's kind of a give and take and sharing of knowledge and experience, and how cities were successful in projects that other communities might want to learn from that same experience. Again, the scope is just to understand what the private market really, drives it for the financial land use design considerations, how to leverage some of the community goals and visions for this corridor, through both public and private shared investment, and then an attempt to build consensus to guide future developments on these opportunity sites, build upon a little bit more detail than what was done for the 2040 comprehensive plan, where some of these opportunity sites were identified along this corridor. The proposal is really to create two advisory teams, one comprised of elected officials, staff, policymakers, some key stakeholders in the communities from the schools, perhaps park district representatives, to help identify the goals and objectives, outreach with community outreach to special groups that sometimes may be underrepresented in such planning efforts, and then reach agreement on final recommendations for the council's consideration. There would also be a citizens, advisory group. This was very important in the Ramsey County application process to make sure that underrepresented groups were given an opportunity to be at the table. And as we do, as I mentioned, we did have a low-income housing census tract in this location. We have many schools. We've got a high proportion free and reduced lunch elementary school in this corridor. We also have transitional housing for those formerly without homes in this corridor. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, there's lots of places of worship in this corridor to do some creative outreach to really make sure the voices of our community are heard. And finally, just the timeline for this project will be completed, hopefully. We would really like to see it completed this year. And the proposal has a number of outreach sessions, hopefully that we can continue to conduct in-person meetings. That was one reason why it was kind of placed on hold during the pandemic, is that face-to-face in-person meetings are really critical to the success of these projects. And you can see the timeline here with tasks assigned to first and second quarter for recruitment of folks and residents wanting to serve on those two guiding committees, some workshop sessions on the corridor development initiative, and finally a final report back to this council at the end of the year. Another couple key points I want to point out, as again, Councilmember Edberg noted, that Ramsey County terminates at Century Avenue, which is part of our eastern boundary, but there are two large tracts or neighborhoods, both the Wildwood Shopping Center and a residential neighborhood to the north, that are actually located in the city of White Bear Lake, but situated in Washington County. So while the map and the graphic that I just showed previously of the corridor area did not include these two areas, there would be intentional outreach to businesses and residents in these areas east of Century Avenue to ensure that full representation of our community would be given opportunity to sit on any of those recommending steering committees. And then finally, tonight's recommendation. I do want to note that $20,000 was allocated in both the 2020 budget as well as, again, in the 2022 budget adopted by the council in December. So we have adequate funding for the city's share, as well as any incidental, such as specific direct mailings, advertisements, or efforts to really perhaps providing snacks, daycare, to support those who may not otherwise be able to attend some of these public meetings. And with that, staff is asking for the council to adopt the resolution accepting the funds from Ramsey County and authorizing the city manager to enter into relevant contracts, including the Ramsey County grant agreement and the project contract with LISC of the Twin Cities in an amount not to exceed $50,000. Then there would be sub-agreements with Vadnais Heights to ensure their share and proportion of contributing their share of that $50,000.
Thank you, Ms. Kane. Council, any questions or discussion? Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to compliment staff. I did ask a series of questions. Pretty much all have been addressed. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Tracy. I have Tracy Schimmick, our Housing and Economic Development Coordinator, to thank for that.
Well, thank you very much. City Manager, thank you for ensuring. The one item that I do want to address, one of my priorities is the corners of E and Bel Air. I'm curious if there is a particular portion of this work that will equip us with particular pieces of information or particular processes that will inform efforts in 2022, moving into 2023, for options and development on that corner. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Edberg. Great question, and I'm sorry I didn't focus on that. But one of the outline of the proposal does include a workshop specifically focused on the four corners at E and Bel Air. And that's a workshop session exploring redevelopment scenarios using a block exercise. And so as the council and the community may know, we debate this building height, density, what the community perceives as a desirable land use versus what the market perceives as a financially feasible project or what the bank industry will support. And so this is one of the specialties of LISC and their corridor development initiative is to have stakeholders in the community kind of sit in the role of a council and make some of the decisions like, oh, so you don't want a 3-story building there? Okay, you want just 2 stories? Well, then you're going to have to put some TIF in, or this is the development that may happen or may not happen. So very specifically, that has been a driving force in our conversations. Both Vadnais Heights has their own opportunity site at the northeast quadrant of 35E, and County Road E is really where they want to focus some of their energies. And then this intersection has been probably, just given the long history and the vacant sites and the condition of those properties, as well as the city being 1/4 owner of them, the top priority and focus of where we wanted to put our energies.
And theoretically, we could all adjourn, go have coffee, ice cream, and/or crepes after that.
Absolutely.
Fine. Thank you.
Council? If not, I would entertain a motion to move the resolution. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The resolution passes. Moving on to agenda item 8D, resolution establishing the city's 2020 legislative priorities. Ms. Crawford.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council held a work session on January 18th discussing the 2021 legislative priority agenda and narrowed that down by consensus instead of 8 priorities to 3. Not necessarily stating that the other 5 are not important, but that these 3 would take top priority for 2022. With those 3, one was adjusted to identify 50% of funding needed to proceed with the public safety building project rather than 35% from the legislature. So I wanted to, although you haven't formally adopted them, staff has moved forward with a 50% request to the legislature. We've heard back from a couple legislators on that, and I do believe that a bill is in queue for that. So tonight we have a resolution in front of you for to adopt your 2022 legislative priorities with the top 3 in no particular order. Increase the deputy register filing fees that reimburse offices for costs to provide customer service. Identify 50% of funding needed to proceed with the public safety building project. And seek legislative relief for cities impacted by district court's order for residential watering ban. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Ms. Crawford? I would just add that, and I want to compliment the council. I thought we had a good discussion last week, and I think it's ultimately a good thing to whittle down the list a little bit to 3 key priorities for us, and I like the direction that we're headed. And with that, if anyone has anything else to add, or unless anyone else has anything, Councilman Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree. I mean, I'm really happy with the focus, because there's a lot going on there. So if we can focus our request, I think it helps. And I'm really glad we're doing a legislative agenda. I think we ought to communicate more. And I'll move passage of the resolution, you want a resolution, right? What do you have? Yeah, resolution. Yep. And just say, when you need us, let us know. I mean, I think Councilmember Hughes brought up at the work session, involve us in, if we got to testify, if we should make personal calls to legislators, let us know how we can help, because I think that'll be effective.
Thank you.
So I'll move approval of the resolution.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second?
Motion is second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
And motion carries. Resolution is adopted. We have item 9, nothing scheduled under that, and item 10, communication from the city manager. Ms. Crawford.
Thank you, Mayor. In front of you, I did pass out a city meeting dates for 2022. On the back side of that, our tentative work session schedule. I had noted that I would send this out to the city council after the previous work session. Figured I would bring it here instead. So the items that are in black text are what we have set. The item in red for May is a tentative work session based on, so it's the Housing Task Force recommendations, land use application process, and HRA. It would be nice to have that sooner, but I would like to fill a soon-to-be vacant position and have that person on board for those discussions. So I just wanted to let you know this is what we're looking at, the dates that are vacant. I don't have anything scheduled at this point. So seeking any feedback you have. Obviously, things can change, so if we have nothing scheduled right now, it's safe to assume we won't have a work session, but things may come up as we go along. So I'm just looking for feedback, nothing to move at this point. And that is all I have.
Sticking with the kind of opposite, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
With the opposite Tuesdays kind of
Yeah,
theme.
yes. So the meeting dates is what the city council approved at the first January meeting, and that called out potential work sessions for the third Tuesday of the month. And to my understanding, that was consistent with previous practice.
Do we like that previous practice was kind of the question. It's a strain, I know, for everybody. I mean, I don't particularly enjoy the last week of the month because I always have Belamo and this meeting in the same week along with something else. But I'd rather do that and have the ability to have open weeks. I don't know how the rest of the council feels on that, though. And I realize staff, bringing them in, it's just one more time to talk about saying, would those study sessions be good on the same Thursday of a council meeting week for scheduling other things in your life. But I'm not hung up on it by any ways. I'm just bringing it up as a point of reference. If there's no further conversation, I'm fine.
I'm certainly open to going with what the council wants to do. I kind of like the idea of having a week that is kind of city business so you can plan other personal things around that. So I'm certainly open to a Thursday night work session on the same week corresponding with city council meetings. Does anyone else on the council have an opinion on that? Councilman Walsh.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I said I was flexible at the work sessions, and I am, because I don't, it really doesn't matter to me, but Thursdays are bad for just a little bit longer.
I just threw out
a little bit
Thursday.
longer, but after,
I just threw
only a
out
few more
Thursday as
weeks.
an example. It could be Wednesday. It's church
Yeah,
night,
only a
but-
few more weeks for Thursdays, and then I'll be open all summer and fall and until October or November again, but yeah, I'm totally, my schedule's easier, I think, than some of you guys to travel for work and whatnot, so.
Councilman Edberg.
Mayor, so I'm amenable to the option that's in front of us. My suggestion is that as we identify specific topics for approximately which months, that we give staff an opportunity to propose dates a month or two in advance and saying, here's the topic, and when would the council be, in March or April, May, whatever, to be saying, so do you want to meet on a Tuesday? On the third Tuesday, do you want to meet on something else? And just be slightly more flexible than having a calendar right now. And we can use this as default, but, just be thinking several weeks in advance and give us some options in case other stuff is going on.
I'm certainly open to that. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Councilman Edberg, it's much more of a fluid situation. It's more ad hoc and not so rigid with a.
We know it's going to be that month. I mean, the subjects are there,
So I want to do two things. I want to affirm the city manager is trying to gather information, inform us, engage us in conversation. We can't do our jobs without that information. Staff can't do their jobs without our feedback. So we got to get ourselves on the same page. I totally get that there is a desire for some regularity, some consistency in preparation, and that I don't think it's that the council should always impose, make imposition on the lives of staff either. It's like that's not completely fair either. So let's have a conversation and try and sort it out and be as modestly flexible as we can. And if we do that well enough in advance, it may not be too god awful.
So let me propose this. In that spirit, we have February 15th. Should we just simply leave that as unscheduled for now, and we'll try your theory, and we'll see in the next week or two if there's a topic that comes up that staff wants to recommend we get together. We'll test it out in the month of February to see if there's a date that's amenable to everybody and go from there. How does that sound? Sure. Okay. Anyone else on the council have any opposition to that? Do we like that idea? Good. Okay. All right. Anything else from Ms. Crawford?
May I suggest that we schedule tonight the April, August, and October work sessions, because those are our standing work sessions for budgets, and they are important. If we could schedule those tonight, if you have your calendars, that would be helpful.
I'm fine with that.
So that would be April 19th. I'm sorry, what were the other two?
August 16th and October 18th.
I think I can make those work. Can others?
Yes, I can.
That works for me.
April and August, I think, but I don't know about October yet.
And then we'll maybe play the May one by ear, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Crawford?
No.
All right. With that, there being nothing else on the agenda, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.